and welcome to another edition of Paper Cuts. With me here today is the jolly Jim Anderson.
Hello.
Yeah.
I think I just
gave away my secret identity, but that's okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You basically took off the glasses. I'm sorry.
The always bright Brando Castro, the master himself, Matthew Chang.
Oh my god.
Always.
The silent partner, the dominating Dan Jackman.
Silence.
Literally silent. So, our topic is the Legion of Superheroes. You may know them as the 1958 creation of Al Plastino and Otto Binder, I believe.
Yes.
So, they have had various incarnations throughout the years and a lot of great stories. So, we're going to go around and talk a little bit about what makes the Legion so unique among comic book superheroes. Matthew, what do you think about the Legion of Superheroes in a very vague and general sense?
Before anything else, the man talking to us all this time without introducing himself.
Oh, yes.
The merciful Mark Mercury.
Mercy.
Thank you, Ray.
That was my name.
Anyways, what I feel about the Legion, actually having to read quite a bit of it recently, and it's a lot to take in. I was first introduced with them through the cartoon series, Justice League Unlimited, and then them getting their own spin-off. I thought it was quite childish at first, then later realizing how the whole dynamic is actually created by the past, and it's kind of nice to see how like the future was affected by the comic books I was reading in the present. So it was really nice seeing how like society has grown for the better from there being superheroes that actually exist in the world. And usually, a lot of people say it would be like a doom and gloom kind of deal. So it's nice to read a comic book where like the future was made better.
It's definitely a bright and shiny future. Like, especially like the classic stuff. They don't really touch on it a whole lot anymore, but like, holy shit, like old school Legion of Superhero shit has like the happiest version of the future you could possibly imagine. It was like that mid-century, like, science fiction is bang, boom, whiz, pow, like, super fun. Like, they just have drills.
Which is why they're saying that this is, the movie of it is going to be like the Guardians of the Galaxy counterpart.
Which is a great idea.
It is.
Guardians, when they came out, took place in the future and were really kind of a Legion knockoff by Marvel.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the Guardians either.
No,
there
yeah,
wasn't a raccoon, there wasn't.
Yondu was the only one who made it into the movie.
Yeah.
But that whole idea of it being the brighter, happier future is kind of like, I think, in stark contrast a lot of times to the Great Disaster, which is the DC event that's hinted at at various times and seen in books like The Atomic Knights and Commandy and Hercules Unbound and OMAC, the original Jack Kirby OMAC. Probably some of the later OMACs too. There have been like 15 OMACs.
How many of those were Jack Kirby things that you just said? Is the Great Disaster the Jack Kirby original idea?
I don't think so because the Atomic Knights were earlier. They were like early 60s.
Gotcha.
But Commandy and OMAC were definitely supposed to be the foundations of it, really. Yeah. Growing out of that original 60s concept.
So answering the eternal question, how do we connect DC comic superheroes to the Planet of the Apes?
Yeah.
Right. Which we're all burning to know.
Commandy, I think, is literally supposed to be OMAC's son.
Okay.
Like the original. Yeah, like Buddy Blank, the original OMAC. His son. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. I'm talking about the Great Disaster. I should be talking about the Legion. My point was, we kind of see these two different futures for the superhero world, and one of them is in ruins and Superman's shattered costume is found by Commandy, and the last superhero OMAC was depowered and it was horrible. Then there's this other world where everything's pretty great and there's a literal legion, like there are a freaking ton of them, who are defending not only the Earth, but the United Planets, this great alliance of worlds. Yeah. It really is a lot more optimistic than a lot of future predictions. I want to get into that more, but first I want to hear how Brando first heard about the Legion and first.
The Legion? Okay. For me, the very first interaction I had was with the Justice League episode. The Far Away from Home, I think it's called. I should probably have notes for that, but yeah. That was my very first introduction with the concept of the Legion, and then I saw maybe like 2 episodes of the television show, and then I decided to give the Mark Waid run a shot, and that was very, very fruitful decision in my comic book life, and then I got to get through that. But I haven't explored any other Legions except
just the 3-boot, as they're called.
Just the 3-boot. I've studied Legion history and like maybe done like a few searches here or there just to see the other versions of the characters and like other Legionnaires that I may have not gotten introduced to in that run, but that's the extent of my Legion experience so far.
One of the interesting things I think about that run is it was eventually followed up by like a kind of general sequel to the main 3 versions of the Legion called Final Crisis Legion of Three Worlds by Jeff Johns and I want to say George Perez, but I don't think that's right.
I mean, he might be. I mean, when this run was ending, it very much was leading into Infinite Crisis.
Yeah.
Or Crisis Infinite, or something like that. But there's actually even like some funny last panel, like kind of meta jokes that like Mark Waid was making, like, you know, about like the concept of Infinite Crisis.
Right.
Yeah.
And so coming out of that, there was they returned the original Legion with Infinite Crisis, but then they brought all 3 Legions back together in Final Crisis for one last go round. And I thought what was really interesting about that incarnation of the Legion as compared to the other 2 is you find out that it's set in the 30th century on Earth Prime.
This one?
Yes, this one.
This one's set in, well, not to nitpick, I think it's set on the 31st century.
Okay.
On some sort of other planet.
I apologize. It's set 1,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
On the Legion planet or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's in the Prime Earth
so
continuity.
Like, yeah.
So the cool thing about that is like they're monitoring Superboy Prime and all, but that's supposed to be our world.
Yeah.
That version of the Legion isn't supposed to be some vague future of the DC universe. That's supposed to be the future of our planet in 1,000 years. Then in 1,000 years, we'll have actual superheroes defending our intergalactic empire. And that shows that optimism doesn't just extend to the realm of the already pretty optimistic DC universe, but can be applied to real life to the extent that you accept Earth Prime as the real Earth.
I've looked into other other Legion runs, just in brief, and the thing that I noticed that's very distinctive about the reboot is like there's a few like characteristics. There's one, I feel like he very much wanted to intentionally focus on the teenage aspect of the heroes. He made the names very, I think like, I don't remember what they were in previous continuities, but like the names purposely corny, and like there's, I think he took all the Silver Age versions of the characters, you know, Cosmic Boy, Dream Girl, Brainiac, well Brainiac 5 is always Brainiac 5, but etc. And there's like a Silver Age joy to it, I feel like when I'm reading it, and I think that's just a quirk of Mark Waid's, you know, style. So.
Lightning Lad is Lightning Lad, not Livewire.
Yeah.
Because in the 90s they thought it was really corny, and I know we mentioned this a couple times.
Yeah, they were
that everybody's boy, girl, last lad, or kid.
And gender.
And so... kid or cadet. No. And so I think that there's really been a move back towards that. Now, a couple times we've seen adult legions be introduced, but for the most part they keep the names. The only prominent exception I can think of is Starboy became Starman. But that's only because Starman's a thing.
I really like that too, because them starting out as kids themselves or whatnot, like it's kind of homage to like, you know, Kid Flash or like Superboy, you know, like kind of the heroes that they're representing. And in the future age, there's not really a need for a secret identity because everyone technically does know their real names. They use them as kind of titles, honorary titles that they take up with joining the Legion as a form of...
Like code names.
Not even code names, because like I said, everyone does know their real names. It's more of like an honorary badge that they get. When you join the Legion, you're allowed to have this kind of name.
And I think that it's actually the 3-boot Legion again who was introduced in a big crossover with the Teen Titans. Because there's something youthful and exuberant about the Legion. And I think that both the Titans and the X-Men really kind of, which are 2 other teams that are known for consistently refreshing with younger
teenagers,
members.
Basically.
Yeah, I think that there's something that both of those teams really drew heavily on, and I think we'll talk more about the connections to the X-Men in a bit, but with the connections to the Teen Titans, there's a very similar ambiance.
There's a certain like,
two titles.
Like with teenage aesthetic, it's the things that I draw off that is like a sense of not exactly rebellion, but like a revolutionary sort of, you know, vibe that always kind of loves off, and I think that's why, at least in the run that I'm aware of, like that's the aspect that was kind of focused on. So That's what I usually draw, like that sort of age group. You know, there's some sort of like rising ideology within them. So, and they are like a very parallel force compared to like everything else that's going on, like the United Planets and whatever.
The science
forces.
police.
Yeah, the science police and what forces it be. You know, so.
I also love that in the 1950s, you could just throw science in front of a word and it sounded like something that would be in charge in the future. Like the science police, or on Krypton, doesn't Jor-El go to the science council?
Which just now to my ears sounds fucking horrifying. Like, anybody called the science police, I'm like, those two words don't belong together. Like, what the that sounds like an evil dictatorship, you know? Like,
it sounds like a
kings.
Science police.
It sounds like some Illuminati going on there.
It sounds like somebody who determines what reality is as like canon. Like it's like an 11th century version of like academia. Like this is really ominous.
Like science is banned and there's a special police force to enforce it.
Control it. Yeah.
And or it would be a wacky 80s buddy comedy flick where they have like, one's a scientist, one's a cop. Are you serious? Yes, that is the proton. No, anyway, continue. I'm sorry. Jim, how were you introduced to the Legionnaires?
I don't remember, which means I either like blocked it out or it just wasn't all that significant, one or the other. I don't recall exactly how I was introduced to them. I definitely remember, like you guys both said, the DCAU animated stuff they featured in an episode of the original Superman, the animated series, and in Justice League Unlimited. I guess probably learned about them around the time that Mark Waid run was coming out. I wasn't reading it at the time. The reason they really always caught my interest because it's fucking weird. It's really, really, really strange shit. Like the actual stories themselves are peculiar. The world they're set in is consistently oddball. The characters are weird. And the history behind it, like the real world history of the publication and the culture that surrounded them is really what caught my attention. Like the story that I guess we'll get into at a certain point of Jim Shooter's career is basically emblematic of the whole thing. Just trolling around on the internet, listening to podcasts and stuff like that, reading. Back in the day, the Legion of Superheroes spawned one of the original fan communities like that ever existed in North America. They basically had this system where, you know, the Legion was a backup story for a long time. It wasn't really its own main title for like almost a decade, I think. But there was a huge interaction between the people who were reading it and the people who were writing it. Like they would take suggestions and have polls and stuff like that in the letters column that later on would be reflected in the story, right? Which led to a long-standing and incredibly powerful group of young teen fans who organized themselves and had, like, I guess what you would now call zines, conventions and meetings and stuff like that, well before that was normal. Like, before, like, even Star Trek people got involved with that shit. That was actually, reading about that was my introduction to the Legion of Superheroes, and I think that's really fucking interesting. It's fucking wacky, especially when you look at the material that they were, like, actually looking at. It's not exactly even necessarily the best and the brightest of, like, the comic book world. It was just something about, like, this idea of there being, like, this 50s, 60s era, like, teen melodrama superhero series that, like, had an unbroken continuity for, like, many, many, many years that hundreds of billions of people were, like, deeply fascinated with. Internally spawned the careers of a shit ton of comic book writers. Like, you guys are talking about Mark Waid? He was one of these people. He's got his fucking comic book kicks as, like, a junior Legionnaire. I don't know what the fuck the little fan club was called, you know, but, like, he was one of those kids with, like, a Legionnaire flight ring made out of plastic or something, from what I understand, you know?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, while we're on that tack, we're talking about the youthful exuberance. Do we want to talk about Jim Shooter real quick? Because I kind of feel like
I already brought it up. It would be weird.
So I kind of feel like you ought to carry through with that.
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the coolest stories in comics, fucking, you know, Legion of Superheroes, as I said, was more or less a backup story. Like, it had a small following, but it didn't have its own title. One of the fans of the series started sending his own solicitations to DC, being like, hey, maybe you should publish some of my stories, maybe you should make me write this, right? strangely, nobody has ever done this, but the guy was sending them to DC as full comic books that he had drawn himself. He was sending them comics with like the panels all drawn out and the bubbles right on the page, and that was his solicitation. Like if you just drew a comic book yourself with like crayon and wrote it and just sent it to somebody, like it's not a script and there weren't suggestions for how the art should go. He was sending them fan comics and being like, hey, could you please publish these, right? They went ahead and did it, right? They hired the guy correspondence style, being like, yes, you're on board. Like, we'll pay you by the story and stuff like that. And that was a young Jim Shooter. Eventually, they figured out it was a 13, 14-year-old kid who they hired to write their comic book series, and which kind of explains the format that the scripts were arriving in, if you think about it. That guy has been working in comics ever since. He's a pretty celebrated figure. I think
he was editor-in-chief of Marvel, president of Valiant.
So that guy, editor, got his start just fucking by mail, sending fan comics into like the major comics publisher in the U.S.
I actually didn't know all the details of that story. That's kind of crazy.
It's fucking bananas. They found out because they needed to get in touch with them. I think it was over like a money thing. You're like, hey, like how can we pay you by money or some bullshit like that? And his fucking mom picked up the phone. He was writing by correspondence for a very long time, never telling them that he was
James. James,
like your employers were on the phone.
Marvel's on the phone.
I don't even know. Like that was well after child labor laws. Like I'm not sure that those Legion stories are actually legal. It might have been against the law.
And the thing is that I think really sets them apart, and the reason it didn't just turn out to be a footnote, like, hey, did you know a kid wrote like 3 issues of the Legion? Is because they were so much different than what DC was publishing at the time.
Yeah.
They had stuff like Starboy killing a dude, and then having to deal with the fallout. Like, I think his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend too. Like not someone he wouldn't have any reason to kill, but like he was doing it for the right reason. But then they like disbar him from the Legion because he's like, he took a life and that's against the Legion code.
Yeah.
And there's another story where Lightning Lad loses an arm and has to get a Luke Skywalker robo-hand 20 years before that was cool.
It had a much stronger sense of continuity than I think anything that was published at the time.
At least by DC.
Yeah.
The Marvel books were probably in the same league, but as far as DC goes, it definitely had more issue-to-issue continuity. I mean, there was one part where one of Triplicate Girl's selves died, and she then had to become Duo Damsel. And
I actually really like that part of the story, because they explain through her how like she feels it. Yeah, she feels what all 3 of them feel. So she felt how she died.
Yeah,
that's
really killed her.
Yeah, really creepy. She actually became one person at one point in time until the other half came back miraculously. But
there was like the whole thing with like basically the Legionnaires. I forget who it was that died. Maybe it was Element Lad. Maybe it was Lightning Lad. But one of them died, and they had a way to bring him back, which was basically Russian roulette with lightning rods. They all stood around a glass coffin holding lightning rods, and one of them would get struck by lightning, and it would kill them, and it would reanimate. I think it was either Lightning Lad or Element Lad. And at first you think, oh my god, Saturn Girl got struck by lightning and it died, but then turned out that the Legion shape-shifting pet Prody had died. And in a certain way, pet death is definitely sadder than Saturnian death.
Yeah, that's about right.
But and that would become like a recurring thing. Like, the Legion can bring someone back to life, but they pretty much have to play Russian roulette to do it. But yeah. So speaking of lightning reincarnation, how I got introduced to the Legion, which actually seems to be after you guys. I think I was vaguely aware that the Legion existed, but I've never had any interest in them until I liked Brad Metzer's novels for a while, especially the one about like Superman's creation. And so I read the Lightning Saga by him and Jeff Johns, which was a JLA JSA crossover just after Infinite Crisis. Who knows?
We never say the names of those things right.
Anyway. And it didn't reboot the Legion, it restored the original Legion. It just said 10 to 15 years had passed and picked up where that left off. And it was really an excellent story. It's probably my favorite Legion story. It was based off that idea that the Legion has to go back in time to restore a member of the League or Society. And the Justice League and Society are like, what are these people doing? And Starman had infiltrated the Justice Society, and one of the really nice touches, basically they didn't have the psychiatric medicines in the 21st century that they do in the 31st, and so he's completely insane, even though he never showed any hint of it previously. That's just because he was on like 31st century medication, and so now he's just bug nuts. And it's a pretty awesome series. It plays a very big role in the Flash, in that it brought back a Flash. I won't say in case anyone hasn't read it, I don't know. But it was really good. And so after that, I read the follow-ups, which were Superman and the Legion of Superheroes. The whole time the Legion was treated kind of mysteriously. You weren't introduced to them from their point of view. You were only seeing them from the point of view of 20th century heroes. And then there's Final Crisis Legion of Three Worlds, was kind of this triptych by Jeff Johns of the Legion, and it restored the original Legion and at the same time put the other two main Legions in kind of continuity where they were, you know. And after that, I went back, I read the old Jim Shooter stuff, I read the old Paul Levitz stuff, and so I think as Brando's most familiar with the three-boot Legion, I'm most familiar with kind of the original Legion, and haven't really read much of the reboot or three-boot or even the post-Crisis Legion. Yeah, that's how I got into the Legion. One of the things that really strikes me about the Legion is that while they all have superpowers, or most of them have superpowers, the vast majority don't get their superpowers from
circumstance.
Yeah, like occasionally they do. Starboy originally passed through the, I don't know, forget it.
Yeah.
Anyway, while a couple of them get their powers from weird shit happening to them, for the most part, they're either humans that have been transplanted to somewhere else, or they're aliens, or
the powers are just normal.
That's just
for those species.
Yeah. And so Starboy he just makes things heavier, and everybody on his planet can make things heavier, but on the Legion, he's the only one that can do that, so it's a useful power.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's a really cool idea, the idea that, like, in the future, we're all Supermen. And there is kind of an everyman aspect to the Legion, which is why there are so goddamn many of them.
Yeah.
Like, just the sheer number of Legionnaires, substitute heroes, and Legion Academy members, like, 10 points to whoever knows who Comet Queen is. Like, there are just a ton of them. That's kind of cool. You know,
cool.
There's something about like the Justice League or the Titans that seems like exclusive, whereas the Legion almost seems like
the YMCA.
Yeah, it's becoming the democratization of superpowers. All right, so Daniel, you're our silent partner here. How about you tell us a little bit about how you either have or have not interacted with the Legion of Superheroes?
Well, before this podcast, the Legion of Superheroes completely evaded my sullen gaze. So I gazed upon the new 52, go and see all the nice and wonderful comics. I conveniently skipped over the Legion of Superheroes, probably because it was called the Legion of Superheroes. I was like, oh, that. Fuck that, I'm not gonna read that. And then you guys started to mention the Legion, and the more you say, the cooler it sounds, which makes me want to look at it a bit. I don't really know who I would like the most, except for what Jim mentioned a while back, which is Arm Fall Off Boy. He's not really a Legionnaire, but rather a gentleman who tried out to be in the Legion, and his special power was to rip off his own limbs and use them for blunt force.
My favorite part about that, man, and I'm gonna let you finish, but fucking, they call him Arm Fall Off Boy, which makes it sound like it's just not attached properly and it happens by accident. Like, it's not arm hit you with boy, or like detachable arm boy would be a lot more accurate. It's just Arm Fall Off sounds like my bumper falls off.
Like, the worst part about that, though, is like I was looking at a panel that he was in, and what he does to go and try out is that the Legion is sitting, they have this desk right in front of them, just sitting nicely, like, who are you? I'm Arm Fall Off Boy. Let me show you. Rips off his own arm, and it looks like a stereotypical piece of, like, ham, in that it's, like, it's all red and has, like, the one bone over there. Like, that is how humans are constructed, actually. And he just takes his whole arm and he whips it across the table that everybody's sitting at, and it goes and crushes beneath the force, and they're just sitting there looking at him like, what the fuck? You just like killed our table. Thanks, fucking arm fall off boy, I guess.
Like, you did not get the job. Like, you failed the interview, I'm sorry.
Great job, asshole.
I think they actually did bring him back for one of the things.
He's one of the, like, what is it? Like, they had, like, the rejects, I guess, or, like, the sub. The
I don't
sub
even think he
legion.
made the subs, honestly. Like, and keep in mind, the subs are a team that included Chlorophyll Kid and Rock Boy, whose ability was to literally turn himself into a stone statue.
Not movable.
Yeah,
Not
like,
movable,
he would
turn into a
increase
statue.
his durability, but lose his motility. And I don't think Arm Fall Off Boy made it in there. But who did make it in was Matter Eater Lad. From the planet Bismol. He can eat anything. He can just chew straight through stuff.
He eats.
And digest it, too.
Okay, I never
So
knew.
he doesn't, like, if he ate a bomb, it would not affect him. Like, it would blow up in his stomach and he'd be fine.
Usually he burps afterwards.
Okay.
That's almost cliche. He will eat a bomb and then be like, brap.
Yeah, like fire and flames.
Right, so it's not like, you know, he can eat anything and then, you know, a bomb explodes in him and he dies.
Right.
There is also Bouncing Boy.
Bouncing.
Actually, he's a founding, not a
Yeah,
founding
he's like a
member.
mainstay.
He's a mainstay, though.
Yeah. He's a big
Chuck
fucking
Tane,
deal.
he can bounce off stuff.
He married one of the babes too. Like
Duo Damsel.
Duo
there you
Damsel.
go,
He
right.
married the girl that can split herself into multiple women.
Fucking like Diesel, dude. Like good for fucking you. Like you know, yeah. he
For
did
some
great.
easily done.
Right.
Good job, Bouncing Boy. We're all proud of you here at Paper Cuts. So, are there any other particular Legionnaires that stick out to anybody?
Wait.
Fucking
So-
Karate Kid.
Karate Kid
Just
yeah.
knows karate.
Yeah.
That's all he does. He's just a martial artist. Like, what the fuck?
I mean, like, compared to a lot of them, that actually is impressive. Like, he's supposed to be, like, a super-duper martial arts expert, which, like, in comic books is a big fucking deal. You know what I mean? Like, basically, Batman can, like, do all the
I was
things he do
gonna
because
say,
he,
yeah.
like, knows a million forms of kung fu or whatever. Like, Karate Kid, but, like, they don't call him, like, if they did it now, he would be, like, some jujitsu shit, like MMA boy or something. But like Karate Kid, first of all, later on after the fact, they made that movie that I never saw. That like anytime you say Karate Kid, most people are gonna think like,
Wow, seriously?
Yeah, this is pre-Karate Kid. Like,
No, I'm saying
No,
you never saw
you never
Karate
saw
Kid?
Karate Kid?
Oh,
no, I've never seen.
Pick up
it.
your game, Jim.
Jim, don't worry. I've never seen Karate Kid either. I only
Okay.
saw the Jane Smith reboot. So.
Okay.
Wow,
I was about to.
Podcast over. I'm ashamed of you people.
We have to
And Jackie Chan.
continue ourselves from half of the podcast now.
But yes.
What the fuck is that shit though? Like what? Like
Well,
he's a black belt. Like in a millionth century, he's a master of karate, which like doesn't even sound cool anymore. Like.
My favorite
Now
thing
listen to me,
about
like-
that is that apparently DC owns the rights to the word Karate Kid.
What?
Yeah, no, because in the 70s, karate was like a bit of a craze. You might have heard of a guy named Bruce Lee. It's pretty esoteric, I admit, but you know. So there was like this kung fu craze, and so like Marvel had Iron Fist and Master of Kung Fu, and Shang-Chi Master of Kung Fu. DC had Richard Dragon Kung Fu Fighter, but they wanted more, and so they had this storyline where Karate Kid goes back to the 1970s and is basically just does kung fu against bad guys in the present rather than in the future. Because it was a title, they trademarked the name. And so if you check the credits for the Karate Kid movies, you will see that DC Comics continually gets credit. Because although no other part of the Karate Kid movies is derived from the comics, because they use the name Karate Kid, they're at the very least giving credit to DC, if not paying them. They are in the DC Comics is credited in the Karate Kid movies. The other thing is, he's supposed to be like really good at karate.
Yeah, no, he's.
And I mean, like, I don't mean like, really, but I mean like he's supposed to be able to like beat Batman easily.
Yes,
like he's like got 1,000 years of martial arts experience on top of whatever Batman
He's like
has.
one of the greatest potential fighters in human history. Like
Yeah.
I get how cool that could potentially be, but he's still called Karate Kid, and he's got like kung fu powers. in a world where you can just transport instantaneously from here to Saturn, and when you get there, there's like cities everywhere, and there's a train that goes through the middle of the Earth, and everybody by default, just by joining the team, gets a ring that makes you fly. Right? This guy is still just like, yeah.
Protein the end.
Definitely shout out goes to Chlorophyll Kid, who has the ability to make plants grow faster. It's not a power, that's just having like
No, straight up
for agriculture.
Straight up, that would be a really good power, but the problem is he can't do anything after he makes it grow. So like he can make like a super powerful Venus flytrap,
Okay.
but have no control over it, so then it will like start attacking the Legion.
Okay.
And that's the reson why he didn't get on the team, the main team.
I would like to point out for a second, the reason the 30th century is a paradise is because he solved the food shortages.
That's amazing.
Chlorophyll Kid just no,
Yeah.
I am making that up completely. But that would be a
like,
thoroughly useful use of that power that everyone should
That's a really good point, though.
Anything else can do. I mean, Matter Eater Lag just fucking consumes. That's actually a problem. Like this guy can like solve hunger, and you know.
No, that's a good point though, because as we said, these people are not special. They're just part of their own race. So his race could have just solved the entire food problem of the entire universe.
Boom. They could have.
Yeah.
Oh
man.
I think there was a guy who was able to cause car accidents or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but he was like
Calamity King. Yeah.
Like it was like the same idea with the Scarlet Witch, where like he somehow affected probability, but it was only for make
No,
trains hit each other.
if you were in his general vicinity, he got turned down from the Legion too. If you were in his general vicinity, bad things happen to you.
He's bad luck.
He was just the ultimate jinx.
See though, I would love him on my team because I'd just be like, you are the best spy ever.
But then just have him sit next to Darkseid, like, be like, hey, I'm gonna ride shotgun in Darkseid's car for a while. Let's see what happens.
Darkseid accidentally falls into a black hole and can't get out.
He hits himself with his Omega beams. Like, how the fuck did that happen? Wow.
Stubs his toe on Calabac. One of the perennial fan favorites that hasn't gained much attention yet but I think we talked about him a little before, is Brainiac 5.
Oh yeah.
He's my favorite, easily.
Yeah.
Easily my favorite.
How about you tell us a little bit about Brainiac 5?
He's created by Computer, right? Like Computer accidentally creates some sort of artificial intelligence. That's the story.
Other way around. Brainiac actually creates a computer. Wait.
Is it really?
Wow, that is weird, man. I don't know.
I don't know actually right now.
I'm pretty sure my notations say that like his origin story is not in the run. As far as I'm concerned, and I've never really like paid mind to that specific aspect of him. But I'm fairly certain that Computo created him out of accident, like accidentally created some sort of artificial intelligence. I see wikis going off. You guys can correct me if that's the case. But I found that to be an interesting aspect, if that's true, because in my perspective, he never really went back. Like, when you create an artificial intelligence in comics, it defaultly has to come back to haunt you. Like, Ultron Hank Pym style, like, you have to regret doing that.
Yeah.
That was never really their relationship or the case, and Computer never really had, like, a strong presence in the stories that I read. When I see Brainiac 5 and other iterations, like the animated series or the Justice League episode, or like when I just kind of glance at other stories besides the 3-boot, I don't really like him as much as in this specific run, only because for me he's a bit of too good, like too much of a goody two-shoes sort of more or less kind of character. I feel like he's overly positive and fairly to the point of blandness, like in my opinion, whereas in the Mark Waid run I feel like that's the only attempt to kind of make him an asshole, like a douchey kind of like
I think that's something that actually holds fairly
like rings across all
stable across most iterations.
Okay,
not like the Silver Age version, but pretty much from the Bronze Age on.
There is some tension with him, but
where,
like I feel like it's mostly pronounced in the 3-boot.
Definitely.
Especially with the things that he tries to pull off in them, like the coup d'etat and like all that sort of nonsense.
He's ultimately smart, so he's ultimately arrogant.
That's what I always assume. Like if you have supreme intelligence, you would just be annoyed by everybody all the time.
And he pretty much is.
Yeah.
Now I feel well actually coming on here.
Oh well, I guess so. I actually do. I have found it. Computo was created by Brainiac 5, and Computo started to try to take over the world. So very much
the 0 Hour reboot, where they wrote the exact opposite story. In Post Zero, he was created by Brainiac 5. Oh no, that's exactly what you said. Never mind.
So okay.
Yeah, Computo was created by Brainiac.
As far as I know,
Okay.
now, and here's the thing: you guys are talking reboot, so I have no doubt that it's entirely possible that in 3-boot, Computo might have made Brainiac 5. Because here's the thing that doesn't make sense about Brainiac 5. When Brainiac 5 was thought up, he was supposed to be the great-great-grandson of Brainiac, the Superman villain. And at that time, Brainiac was just a smart alien.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
Brainiac 5 was just a smart alien. And it was fairly straightforward. And I have this feeling that in the Silver Age, he made Computo.
Yeah,
But
I just looked it up.
in the 1970s, they went and made Brainiac actually a robot. That he was an artificial intelligence.
Yes.
Now, since then, I know they came up with the whole plot where Brainiac, the computer program that likes capturing cities, adopts a child. And that lineage, that it's through adoption that he's related to the original Brainiac. But I'm not sure how true that still holds. Especially because I think in the Action Comics run in New 52, they said that Computo and Brainiac were one and the same, like the original Brainiac.
Yeah.
So the idea of Brainiac 5 coming from Computo isn't entirely foreign, and I think that there have been so many legions and so many tellings that it's entirely possible that you're correct.
It is.
Unfortunately, I wasn't, but
Okay.
I like those points that you just made.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't know if that was the case or not. And
No, I didn't know either.
I wasn't ready to jump to that conclusion just because...
Yeah. There was definitely like feasibility there, but
Brainiac 5 is like definitely like the breakout star of like the Legion. Like if there is one.
Yeah.
You know. I mean,
Especially because his powers consist of just being smart and hiding behind his shield. Because he's got a belt that can make a shield, and so he just...
yeah, flicks it on,
Yeah, and
steals a flight ring, and just does whatever.
That's
Yeah.
the thing too. He invented the flight rings, so
And also, in a way, Booster Gold, because two of the items stolen, the Legion Flight Ring and the energy belt that give Booster Gold his powers, both Brainiac 5 inventions.
wait, Booster Gold has a Legion flight ring?
Yeah, that's how he
I
flies.
didn't know that.
He just stole, but he was like this...
So much of future
I
tech.
know
Yeah.
he stole shit from like the museum he worked at or whatever.
he
but I
stole a
didn't realize it
Legion
was a
Flight
Legion
Ring that gives him the ability to fly. He stole a...
force field belt.
Yeah, Brainiac 5's
That's it.
force field belt so that he could have a force field. And he stole Rip Hunter's time machine so he could go back in time. And he just like stole a bunch of shit and was like, yeah, now I'm a superhero. Call me
Right.
Gold Star, but they fucked up his name. Anyway, so yeah, Legion actually comes back to beat the hell out of him once because he has a ring and shouldn't. Alright, we talked about Brainiac 5. Does anybody else jumping out at anybody? 'Cause I've got one more that I think we should probably talk about, but I'm not sure.
Individual character?
You know,
Yeah.
just to say, like, I know that there's a lot of conversation about Superboy, and
Yeah.
That's
you guys,
what I wanted to touch on,
will
yeah.
go into that. I fucking have no idea about anything with Superboy and the Legion. Just saying, like, very minute.
He's basically the
You guys are
idol.
covered, man.
Yeah, you guys will have to
Yeah.
have to fill me in as that goes on because that is very non-consequential in the Mark Wade 3. Like, he's not like present in any capacity. So
Yeah, there's
Right.
a good reason for
Right,
that.
there is
Yeah.
definitely a good reason.
But
for
yeah,
that.
you guys take care of that.
So, in the original version, R.J. Brand is this billionaire chameleon person, and he is, like, I don't know, mugged on a bus, and 3 random teenagers with superpowers stop
Not
the
even
muggers.
superpowers, just like
Yeah.
they use their powers.
Yeah. Cosmic Boy, and they become Cosmic Boy, Lightning Lad, and Saturn Girl. And basically, Brand's like, I will give you a clubhouse and a shit ton of money and all this stuff. You have to live up to the role of the 20th century teenage superhero, Superboy. And so the whole identity of the Legion was based on the idea of we're living up to the model sent by Superboy. The 4th member of the team after those 3 is Superboy because they go back in a time bubble, grab him, and are like, hey, you want to come join our club of superheroes? And he's all like, I'm lonely. I'm the only superhero I know. I'll join. And that's pretty straightforward, and that was fine until the Crisis.
Yeah. I mean, what you just said is a long period of time,
Yeah,
too.
that's 30 years.
That's like, yeah, 30 years. 30 years right there. And I don't think the continuity was fucked with very much up until that point.
No.
I think, yeah.
Outside of small changes like Brainiac, they mostly kept everything
Yeah.
copacetic.
Yeah.
Then Crisis came, and they decided that they were going to keep the Legion the way it was because the Legion was selling well. It had 2 titles. It was in the height of that team comic thing that was going on with X-Men and Teen Titans. So They decided to keep the Legion the way it was, but the people John Byrne was rewriting Superman, and he decided he didn't like Superboy. He thought Superboy was an awful idea.
Yeah.
And so he wrote Superboy out. And
so Superboy no longer exists.
Right.
In continuity.
In Superman continuity.
Right.
But in Legion continuity, they were still referencing Superboy. And their whole raison d'etre was Superboy. So eventually they came up with the explanation. There was a scene in John Byrne's Superman where he runs into a series of Kryptonian criminals and executes them with gold kryptonite, like General Zod and stuff, right? And they're from a pocket dimension. And according to I think it's the same pocket dimension. According to the writers of the Legion at that time, that pocket dimension is where Superboy comes from.
Yes.
So basically, after going through all that trouble to get rid of alternate universes, they said, but this took place in an alternate universe.
Very quickly after the whole Crisis thing, too. Yeah.
And that really bugged people. So they had to reinvent that pretty quickly, and I think it was about in '88 that they jumped forward 5 years in time to have adult Legionnaires. And in doing so, they decided to just ignore the Superboy thing for a while. And when they relaunched in '94 with Zero Hour, what they decided to do was replace him with another Legionnaire, Mon-El, who's from Daxam, which was a Kryptonian colony where they developed a weakness for lead instead of kryptonite, and had been trapped in the Phantom Zone by Superman for 1,000 years to keep him alive until he could survive when Brainiac 5 could cure him in the 30th century.
Yeah.
The problem with this is Mon-El had like 2 adventures in the 20th century. Like there's no heroic legacy to a guy named Mon-El. Like we were trying to live up to the great legacy of Mon-El.
Yeah.
Like literally his name is Mon-El because Superboy found him on a Monday and his own last name was El and Mon-El had amnesia. So like there's no reason that it just didn't make any sense. And so when the 3-boot came along, they decided to ditch that idea and instead have them be inspired by other teen heroes of the 20th century, the Teen Titans. So their first appearance was in a crossover with, well, I don't know if it was the Teen Titans. It might have been Young Justice.
There was a crossover.
I think it was Teen Titans. I think it was the Jeff Johns run at the time.
Okay,
if I'm
so
not
it was
mistaken, I think it was Teen Titans Volume 3.
It was
I
either
believe.
Titans or Young Justice. Probably Titans.
Yeah.
You're probably correct. They just decided to go with that. And then Infinity Crisis came along and brought Superboy back into continuity, and that allowed them to bring back the original Legionnaires. Until the New 52, when they took Superboy out of continuity again, and then they kept the same Legion and then decided to just throw some doubt onto which Earth the Legion was from in the final issue of the series. So
Superman, man.
basically what happens is Legion history is really confusing, and 75% of the reason for that is because they can't decide whether or not Superboy happened in continuity or not.
And at various times, especially recently, may legally not be allowed to use the character or make direct reference to him.
Right.
I mean, that gets complicated. And it's fucked up and kind of sad because, as I was talking about earlier, for a really long time, this had a fucking tight continuity. Like, it's maybe not the greatest thing you're ever gonna read, but some people poured their heart and soul into an unbroken storyline that, like, thousands of people devoured. They were like Trekkies back then, you know? There was a cult around this thing. You know, I'm never a member of it, but, you know, I appreciate it from a distance. And now, like, for decades, it's been in a state of flux. And, like, they don't get rid of it. It's still around. There's good runs. Like, you guys are, like, just showering love on some of the recent stuff. Like, it's good shit, cool characters and stuff. But at the same time, it's like they can't really get their act together in terms of what are we doing with it.
See, when I think about the continuity shifts that it's had to, like, you know, endure over time, and I understand how that can be kind of dejecting for new readers, obviously, like, when you think about it. I mean, even as, like, seasoned comic fans, it is kind of like a little bit to wrap your head around, but I don't think it's that strenuous, like I've said. Because I'm not really sure why not a whole lot of people aren't interested. I know when I addressed it very few times, with people, they kind of like stress it's like, oh, I'm not down, like there's so many Legionnaires, or like there's so like many different aspects to go to. I'm like, I kind of find that to be strange. I mean, I guess it's like a preferential thing, like when you deal with big casts, really. But I feel like that's the appealing thing about a lot of like mainstay, like pop culture, comic book sort of centric things, like Transformers, or G.I. Joe, or X-Men, or stuff like that from like that period of time. You know? like large casts weren't really a problem. Like they kind of just offer diversity.
Part of the success of the original series is that it was a huge team book.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't a ton of them back then, and that's one of the reasons why it was so popular. Is you have that group dynamic, and you have the potential for romances and all that wacky stuff that you can have with an ensemble cast.
And I think it was handled quite nicely back then when it's like, it's such a large cast, but then it's broken up. Like, you'll follow this group and then that group, and that was done a lot back then.
Sure.
And, you know, it was very rare when everyone got together, but when it did, that was a big event.
I really like the, you mentioned, once again, the X-Men. The X-Men really drew a lot on the Legion, and not just in the whole being teen superheroes thing, but in really a lot of their fundamental ways. I mean, the character design, like, facially, you can tell I was motioning at my face at that time. And,
had to be heard.
Yeah. And power set wise and demeanor wise is almost identical to what Wolverine would become.
Yeah.
And Wolverine's a lot more popular than Timberwolf for some reason. Maybe it's the name, maybe it's the costume. I don't know. But that wasn't the only thing. Another prominent X-Men.
The only one I know of is Nightcrawler. Yeah, Nightcrawler. I mean, this is partly urban legend, as far as I'm aware. I do believe it's true, but I've never really sourced it out to like really get down to the bottom of it and stuff like that. But my understanding is that the guy who was drawing Legion of Superheroes... Dave Cochran? Okay, alright. Dave Cochran. Dave Cochran.
Keep saying
Dick Cochran.
Dick Cochran.
That's very disrespectful. The man died. Dave Cochran.
Dead boner man.
We're going to get hate for that if anybody listens to this.
Around the time, a little bit before the famous giant-sized X-Men came out, that really, like, you know, all these characters, you know, everybody, you know, giant-sized X-Men #1, blah, blah, blah. He was attached to Legion of Superheroes at the time. They had him do a massive 2-page spread that had every single character in the entire cast of Legion of Superheroes in it, right? It was a wedding, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering this correctly. It was a wedding between two of the characters, you know? So, you know, he did this big blowout thing, and it's a lot of fucking characters, and they even had odd people in there, like the Martian Manhunter was there and stuff like that, right? So he pours his heart and soul into just this, you know, it was a big 2-page spread, and this is back in the day, you know, so these things, going full force on the artwork wasn't as common back. As many people know, a lot of people who work in comic books are not allowed to keep their art or don't necessarily own any authorship right to any of the stuff that they create. One of those deals. He politely asked DC, I know you guys don't do this a lot, but could I have this piece of art? Like, could I take this home with me? You know what I mean? Could I just own the object? Not necessarily the rights to it to make prints or anything like that, but could I take it? Because I put so much work into it, right? They said, nah, I'm sorry, we can't. Right? So he said, fuck you, and he jumped shit, and he went over to Marvel, right? And he had Legion of Superheroes characters that he took with him, that he had originally created for the Legion, and just because he began work on X-Men, dumped them there. So, like, if you've ever wondered why the fuck Nightcrawler looks so weird compared to anybody else in the X-Men, it's because he was originally designed for, like, goofy Superboy, you know, pals in, like, 30 millionth century and stuff like that.
So, one of my favorite characters from the Marvel Universe is actually a DC character.
Yeah, he could have very easily been, like, throwaway Legion character.
And it's funny because you just mentioned this and it clicked something in my head. I've heard the same thing about the Starjammers, which makes me think that all the swashbuckly types that were introduced in the mid-70s X-Men comics might have actually been intended for the Legion. I mean, it makes sense. They're all spaceborn.
Yeah. Which is a weird part of X-Men mythology. Like, the fact that, like, these kids in a school, for like a Harry Potter school, half of it takes place on, like, Star Destroyers. Yeah. For some reason,
and speaking of which, the Shi'ar are guarded by this group called the Imperial Guard in X-Men comics.
Yeah.
They are a straight 1-for-1 of the Legion of Superheroes.
That's hilarious.
So, like, you know, the Gladiator or whatever is supposed to be Superboy.
Oh my god, fuck Gladiator.
Yeah, thank you. I hate that shit.
But, like, Scintilla, Shrinking Violet. I don't know why I picked Scintilla. What? Anyway, like, there's basically a 1-for-1 of every one of those members of the Imperial Guard to some member of the Legion of Superheroes. Smashers, Ultra Boy, you know, that type of thing. And,
Was Lilandra input in that at all?
No, because she was not one of the super team, but the members of the Guard are all supposed to be the Legion of Superheroes. So essentially what you have is Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum worked in this version of the Legion of Superheroes, like just analogs for Legion of Superheroes, and then introduced a bunch of characters that Dave had planned out to be in Legion of Superheroes, and their most popular character was a character that's pretty much a ripoff of the Legion of Superheroes character. So, the golden age of X-Men is in a lot of ways derived from the Legion of Superheroes.
Wow, that makes me like the Legion even more so.
Yeah. One of the cool things that I like about the Legion is interlac. By the time of the future, they're not actually supposed to be speaking English anymore. They're speaking a language that's common to all of the United Planets called interlac. As far as I remember it, if I remember it correctly, we're reading their speech and thought bubbles as English, but all the signs in universe are printed in this language called interlac. The basic idea behind it is it's a one-for-one thing. Like, each interlac symbol replaces an Latinized letter, so you can read interlac just if you know what the code is, but essentially they invented their own alphabet for writing the signs in the Legion because they aren't supposed to be speaking English anymore.
Oh man, is that in the old school?
I think so.
Right.
It's definitely in the reboot. It's probably in the old school.
Okay.
I think it's one of those things that got maintained from the reboot into the more current versions, but yeah, that's one of those odd things. I think it was probably a 70s thing, if I had to make a guess.
That's super cool.
But yeah, just that they invented their own little alphabet for Legion comics. One other thing you mentioned to me just before the podcast, Chang, was the aspect of legacy. Now, we talked about Superboy, but him and his friends like Supergirl and Jimmy Olsen when he's Elastic Lad are literally grabbed out of the past and put into the present. So, like, there's a certain amount of legacy to the Legion heroes coming down from the current day heroes. Does anybody have any examples of that or anything they want to talk about of that?
I mean, I guess I'm trying to think of good legacy. I mean, when I think of them off the top of the head, I guess like Ultra Boy kind of an emblematic of Superman a little bit. I mean, all his powers are...
Yeah.
He basically uses Superman powers just one at a time.
Yeah, he's got the Superman set, just can't use them all.
Yeah, gosh, I'm trying to think of a few, but off the top of the head, it's a little tough. I'm trying to think of the core group.
Well, basically, as you said, like I said, like there's a legacy of them, and because of that, they actually go into the past and bring the heroes to the future. Kind of as role models, real life role models to like follow up and like, not necessarily idolize, but kind of like see them in action firsthand and be able to, I guess, mimic. Would be a good word for it. Yeah, having these characters constantly pulled from the past to be seen firsthand fighting super villains in the future just shows like the importance of our heroes today, even that them being heroes doesn't just happen in this time, but can happen in the future, and the legacy doesn't have to be them going into the future, but them creating it here and then it being as a role model for later generations.
That's one of the things I like. And there are specific carryovers, like Barry Allen's kids, the Tornado Twins, are raised in the 30th century. They aren't Legionnaires, but they interact with them. Mm-hmm. They're just super speedsters. But then the daughter of Dawn Allen is Jenny Ognatz, XS, one of the 90s Legionnaires who ended up joining the original team. So the Flash's granddaughter is on the team. Mm-hmm. Or there's a Green Lantern from Earth. I was just going to say, there's always Ron Vidar or whatever. Yeah, he's another one that's not officially a Legion member, but he
works with them.
Yeah.
On a constant basis.
On a more mental-based level, there's a Starboy becomes Starman after meeting the Starman of the 20th century, two Starmen of the 20th century. And then, in fact, goes back to the 21st and becomes one of the Starmen of the 21st century. So there is kind of this idea of mantles being passed down for 1,000 years. My favorite, although it's not really a mantle passing, is more of a direct continuity, is Darkseid. In probably the best Legion story ever, and we've talked about how we aren't like huge Darkseid fans here, but in what's probably the best Legion story ever, The Great Darkness Saga by Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen, which is going to be the thing I recommend today. Basically, Darkseid is the last thing left on Apocalypse, and Apocalypse is just this burnout planet. There's, the fire pits are out, gone cold, and it's just a dead body floating through space, like getting in the way of shipping lanes. And then the Legion goes to investigate, and basically Darkseid finds this very pure, better, optimistic future, and he wants to show what real evil looks like, because they haven't seen it. They've seen the Fatal Five, and they've locked them up on Takran Galtos and forgotten about them. And so the Great Darkness Saga really kind of has this guttural feel to it, where the Legion are actually in danger. You know, there's something that's going to, you know, this ancient evil.
Yeah.
It's a real way.
Yeah. In a way, the Legion's always been in the kind of second string of DC heroes, to kind of see them trying to fend off the DC villain.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's also beautifully illustrated.
It really is.
I have like a fucking hard-on for this era of like DC comics. Like, it looks like the George Perez style, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of like the early, like, I guess late 70s to
Early 80s.
Yeah, that type of shit. The colors are fucking gorgeous. You can pick it up in trades. Like, I guess we're not at recommendations yet, but I'm already recommending it.
Yeah,
like,
I'm going to be definitely.
double endorsed. And there's a couple tie-ins, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
it varies between 6-inch shoes to like 400 pages.
Yeah.
Your options.
Yeah, you get like the hardcover, and it has every like plot twist in it. It's pretty great. So like there's that kind of direct lineage too, as well as the older ones. Now, one of my favorite things is as far as the lineage aspect goes, and guys, if I'm going on too long here, just
No,
like,
you're good.
don't
Keep
mind
going.
me.
Yeah, this is a villain.
But in the 1998 event, DC 1 Million, we see the Heroes of the Future, and it's like meant to be it's their JLA.
Yeah.
But what JLA stands for in the 853rd century, the basic premise was that it would be when the 1 millionth issue of Detective and Action Comics would come out, because in 1998 it was completely antithetical to DC's outlook to ever do something like reboot action or detective. But theoretically, when their 1 millionth issue would have come out was in the 853rd century, so they had comics set there for a month. And the JLA of that period stands for the Justice Legion Alpha, meaning that this kind of legacy that starts with like the Justice League or the Justice Society in like the 20th century, and then goes through the Legion in the 30th century, goes all the way through time, like till the heat death of the universe, because it's like the Justice Legion Alpha is like, you know, carrying that flame as for both teams in the
Are you talking
far
about
distant future.
the series that they did in like the late 90s?
Yeah.
Okay, because I know they did a similar concept fairly recently. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like the era where they made like the Martian Manhunter like literally became Mars or something like that.
he might have. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
remember that.
Yeah, I think he
but-
was still alive at that point,
Yeah.
but like they made him like become one with the planet.
And Vandal Savage fights Superman
Of
on Mars.
course,
Yeah,
he's still
yeah.
kicking there.
Yeah, Solaris, the rogue sun's there. Yeah. As far as DC events go, it's pretty solid. I always just thought that was a cool shout out that, you know, not only does the legacy continue for 1,000 years, it continues beyond that. But yeah. So anybody else have any points that they're interested in making about the Legion?
Apparently there was one named False Pretenses Lad.
Seriously.
Yeah, for real. Yep, that's what he's called.
What, did he trick girls into having sex with him? Like, it turns out I'm not an astronaut, sorry, too late, false pretenses, lad.
Yeah, apparently
Long live the Legion!
a little birdie is telling me that he lied about his powers in order to get onto the Legion, so they
You'd
dubbed
think
him
the name
Blind.
would be a giveaway.
I think the name might be retroactive. I think it's a punishment.
That's,
but still, that'd be great. Like, I'm liar boy. Like, please believe everything I'm telling you.
That's the.
That could be a really good power, though, if his power is that you initially believe his lie.
that's the tr- I
Because he
think that is
did
the
get on the
case.
Legion.
Well, I think that concept is actually what introduces the 3 route that I'm in. It's not like a false, it begins with the introduction of Invisible Kid, or Invisible Boy rather, during the Legion, and then
It's Invisible Kid.
Is it Invisible Kid?
Yes.
Thank you, pardon me.
Wasn't that the name of that fucking Metallica song?
Is it?
I don't listen to Metallica.
Oh, man. Anyway, derail.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, so that's the gateway to the entire story, and then there is like a lot of consequence to that introduction as you go through the story. But like, there's a lot of interesting concepts that are thrown around about the future with like the Legion, like the science police, and like the concept of like United Planets or whatever. And
The Federation.
Yeah, the Federation.
It's basically like a young
Yeah.
adult version of like the Federation from Star Trek.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, really goofy and cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I like how they operate separate to that somehow. Like they are sanctioned on some level. Like,
Yeah.
Like Cosmic Boy is like on tap with like the United Planet. I'm trying to think of other concepts to grab at. So give me a minute.
I like a lot of like little character things that throughout the years hold up for certain versions of characters and not for others. I always thought Dream Girl's powers were really interesting. That
I like her dynamic with Brainiac 5.
Yeah, that she can see the future, but that's not always the most useful talent. In fact, it's sometimes kind of a depressing.
That's a mainstay in the 3-boot series, exactly.
Yeah.
Like, what's it called? In the beginning, one of the first 2 issues they have, I think it's the second issue, Brainiac pieces together like random acts, like random circumstantial things to a case for a murder that will happen in the future, but Dream Girl just precognitively knows that this murder is going to happen, so they get there in time thanks to her, even though he's kind of like slaving away to kind of like come up with the concept of the murder, but she's so much faster than it. And it aggravates him. He's just like, fuck! You know, I put all these random shits together, you know, and she just knows, and he's very angry at like the concept of her powers at all and like her planet. And then also with Dream World, they kind of go into this whole mini plot line where they go to her planet, where everyone is, you know, has that
precognitive.
Yeah, and sleep is a very a really dynamic part of their senses. Like it's just like feeling or breathing or anything like that. And children are there's an epidemic where children aren't sleeping, and they don't know why. Later you figure out, spoilers if you ever want to read the 3-boot, that the government on the planet is actually interrupting their the children's sleep, so they don't have premonitions, so they don't know about this future that a lot of the planet is seeing, and it's like a huge like doomsday sort of style future where like the planet goes to war, and the first people who get drafted in the war, the youngest going up, and like the kids are all going to die, and like they don't want them to see their future. So like Dream Girl has to kind of like weighing out, like, do I let them see it? Like, is this really a mercy? And like Brainiac's just like, fuck it, let's just get rid of that, just, like scrap that shit.
I'll have to check that out. That sounds good.
That sounds really
Yeah, they're
good.
like they're grading against each other the whole time. Brainiac 5 and Dream Girl. Mostly Brainiac 5 because Dream Girl is such a passive character, aloof kind of, not aloof, but like a lackadaisical kind of like. She's out there like in the middle of a fight.
We live in a haunted house.
Yeah. Like in the middle of a fight, she'll just kind of like daze out because she thinks they've already won the fight.
Yeah.
Until she has to actually move. She's like, oh, I'm sorry, I thought we won the fight already. It's like that kind of attitude where like she's so like just very relaxed about everything. But like this is a good dynamic between the two of them. And by the end of it, there's like a nice little trade of words. I remember it very clearly where Brainiac is actually, she's like questioning what she did, like if it was the right thing to do. And Brainiac comes to her and like calms her down and comforts her and says like, all your, you know, premonitions are, in my opinion, subjective. Like they can still be changed. You don't have to be infallible. And she like comes back at him real cute, like she's like, you'll think differently when we're married. And he's like, and then he like takes it real serious, and that's the first time you see any genuine surprise or shock on the character of Brainiac 5 in that run. I'm like, oh shit. And then he just like shrugs it off. He's like, foolish girl, like she'll have to try harder to mock me or some shit like that or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of cool interactions between Brainiac 5 and Dream Girl throughout the whole thing. By the end of that story, more spoilers, she get killed. But he like stores her body and like in some weird epilogue. I mean, because this was leading to Crisis on the Infinite Earths or whatever. Infinite Crisis. Sorry.
Yeah.
I always fucking say them wrong. But it was leading up to Infinite Crisis, and like so they were ready for a change. But like there's an epilogue where like he's storing her body in like some tube, like totally inconsequential to the story, but just like it's a little tidbit. Like you see Brainiac 5 just manages to keep her corpse somewhere, and like he's trying to revive her.
That's one of the things that has to be noted about Brainiac 5 is that in his initial incarnation, he was a Supergirl love interest. Mm-hmm. And then in the first reboot, they made him gay, and him and Invisible Kid were involved. And then by 3-boot, he was with Dream Girl. So it's like, there was some romantic interplay there.
Somewhat, yeah.
So it is kind of curious to see the way that like the different versions of the characters have that going on.
And their interaction with Invisible Kid is very much like he is the dominant presence. Like Invisible Kid's total scrub, even though he's kind of like, I don't know, they suspect him for being a spy in the story because his father is a member of the science police. And it just turns out he's like a kid who ran away from home who stole some like vial that lets him become invisible. So like there's nothing like inherently special about him. He's one of the rare circumstantial heroes.
Yeah.
Where like he actively did something like to enable him powers. He's not like heroic. He's like a normal human. So
one of the moments I liked from Reboot Legion, and I haven't read a whole lot of it, but one of them I liked, one touch I liked is Colossal Boy. Because in most incarnations, Colossal Boy is Jim Allen, the son of the president of the United Planets. His mom's the president of the whole Federation deal. And not really too much to him, you know? But in the Reboot Legion, they said that he had come from a planet of giants.
yeah.
And he was unique among them because he could shrink. So when he used his shrinking powers, he would be the size of a regular human.
Yeah.
So it kind of turned the whole like Hank Pym Giant Man concept on its head of being rather than a guy that can grow to a humongous size, it's a humongous guy that can shrink down to our size. So he never treats anything the Legion's dealing with as being very serious.
Yeah.
Because to him it's all just his grand little adventure with the little people, like he's Gulliver or something. And so like to him it's just completely foreign that like, oh yeah, none of this actually matters. I could return to my normal size and stomp everything, you know? Like
all their like perspectives is very interesting, yeah. Like when I think about that is another good one. I think Triplicate Girl has a semi-interesting perspective on things. She's more of a survival character. They give some interplay for, or not interplay, some backstory for her, almost like an origin story for her in the reboot, where she's like from like a completely desolated planet and she's had to survive. And she's like always like splitting up. So like when she's in the Legion, she's like very calm compared to her previous situation, but she's also kind of like foxy, kind of in a way, and she's kind of like the I don't know how to put it, like the girl you want.
Yeah.
And they use that to Cosmic Boy uses that to his advantage. Like he uses her to gather information from the other lads, and he pretty much puts her up on 3 dates and makes her date like all of them.
I know in like different incarnations, different ones are supposed to have slightly different personalities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every time she splits, she's supposed to be slightly more, like, you know,
There's
like
different...
each one has a slightly different personality than the other, but they all combine to make her, which
usually
is
one of the three
idea.
has the attitude that's normal to all, like, being together, and then the other two are on different side of a spectrum where I believe one is usually shy, and the other one is usually more like the aggressive one.
Yeah, they unfortunately named her Triad for a while in the 90s when they were trying to make everyone core, and Triplicate Girl sounds like your secretary, so, you know.
You can't, I think it's really heretical to try to make the Legion characters sound or look cool.
Yeah,
like,
no.
I don't want them to be hip or relevant. That's what's so cool about them, is that it's fucking weirdo little kid shit from the 60s. Like, it's stuck in time. Like, just let that be what it is. It's beautiful, you know?
Another weird one, alternatively known as Princess Projectra and Censor Girl. She's, actually, I think she's married to Karate Kid, of all people. But she basically comes from this, her name's Jackie. She comes from this world that's completely medieval. It's just, you know, that world never progressed beyond the state of Earth's medieval period.
Yeah.
So there are like dark magic witches and stuff, and like, so in this hyper futuristic universe, there's just this one world that's stuck in like the 11th century. And she's got the ability through magic, of course, to project images. And so she joins the Legion, and then she comes back, and her dad dies, and like, this isn't Great Darkness. And so she's like trying to take over the mantle of her father.
Okay.
And it's like, she's been off planet. She's been experiencing all this sci-fi stuff. She wants to bring this world into the 30th century, but they're in the 11th century, and it's like
much,
and some interesting stuff happens because of that conflict there.
You want to like progress 2,900 years.
Yeah, exactly. Like think of how out of place someone from the year 1000 would be in the year 2000.
Yeah.
Now think about how out of place they'd be in the year 3000. Yeah, you mentioned Ultra Boy. He got his powers because he was swallowed by a whale.
Yeah.
And a space whale, because that's a thing. And his real name is Joe Nah.
Yeah.
Jonah, he got swallowed by a whale.
Did they use him as one of the Superboy surrogates or something like that? Wasn't that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we were discussing that very
Basically,
briefly.
there were a bunch of people that were Superboy on the Legion. So there was Superboy, and there was Supergirl, who's virtually identical just from a couple of years later. And there's Ultra Boy, who's just like Superboy, except he can only use one power at a time.
Yeah, I mean, he has the same set. It's just,
Yeah.
Okay.
And he came up with different names for everything because, of course, he did. So, like, rather than X-ray vision, it's penetration vision, which is hilarious.
Ooh, God.
And
It just sounds like something is mounted on a camera. You know what I mean?
anyway,
Penetration boy.
and there's Mon-El, who I mentioned, who's like a Daxamite, so like he's Kryptonian except weak against lead and can't see through copper. And
They're technophobes too, if I'm not mistaken.
they might be, yeah.
Yeah, like, I think like they banned any form of technology because they were like crazy pilgrim Kryptonians or something.
I think it was like Krypton was setting up a space empire.
Yeah.
And then Jax-Ur destroyed their moon base.
Okay.
And after that, they were like, okay, no more space travel.
Yes.
And that's why there's only one rocket to send Superman out when Krypton gets destroyed. But that also meant that their colonies were like completely isolated on these other worlds.
Yeah.
And just had to kind of like mutate into their own thing.
Yeah.
And so they get like weird and reclusive and stuff.
Yeah. It's cool shit. I'm most familiar with like the 2000s version of the character, who's really neat. Like I don't know exactly how much carries over retroactively. The opposite of that like was pulled from previous stories. Like he had black eyes and stuff like that with these weird ass pupils and stuff. I remember they brought him into like Blackest Night and stuff. It was really neat shit. Yeah.
I think they actually gave him some present day adventures too for a while when Superman was off on New Krypton.
That's cool.
Yeah, and
do you
beside Mon-El, there's also Starboy originally had a Superboy power set, but they took that away from him eventually. But yeah, so initially there were like 6 or 7 Superboy analogs on the team.
to avoid, when they didn't have access to Superboy at all.
Right,
So-
yeah.
But yeah, I was gonna say one hero. I'm not sure if there's any differentiation through continuity or if she's even in other stories, but Phantom Girl, who's in
Phantom Girl is very common across
okay,
all
good,
continuity.
because I really like her power set, being able to I mean, she's to the eye, it looks like she's like phasing through things like Kitty Pryde style, but like she's actually like traveling between dimensions. So like someplace there's like policemen and like slug monsters who are walking their dog or like looking at like this like after image of a girl who's like fighting, whatever she's fighting. So
That's so cool.
that's very
pretty
strange
cool.
concept.
Yeah.
So and like they take the time to animate like whatever else she is.
Phantom Girl has this strange following, and I never knew this, but I found this out fairly recently online. Like, there's like a large cross-section of Legion fans who are Phantom Girl fans.
Yeah.
And that's kind of strange, because she never plays like a huge
No, she
role
never
in
really-
any of the stories that
Wasn't
I've
she one of
read.
the original 3.
I think she's
No,
one of the-
that
she was
Saturn
never one of the
Girl.
original three.
Okay, alright,
Yeah,
gotcha,
she's-
gotcha.
Well,
But she was always like top 10, like
Okay.
within the first 10 members, she would always be one of them.
like
Okay.
Psylocke or something. There, but not ever integral.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that covers just about every, like, I think all of our favorite ones. But closing out with like the Legion, I think a lot of what has to do with them being so iconic is similarly with the X-Men. There's just so many of them that we eventually kind of just see a character and we see a bit of ourselves, I guess. Even though they're another alien race or something like that. At the end of the day, there's like a little piece of us in one of the characters, being there so many of them. And we can just relate to what they're going through because they give them real world problems with like kind of relationship dynamics and stuff. And eventually one of those stories relates to us, probably somewhat personal. So I think that's what really like lets them keep going and kept them in
Resonates.
I think
continuity.
it's extremely astute.
Yeah.
I think that led to their initial success back in the day, and it's probably what gives them the longevity that they have now. I mean, you can say that about a lot of superhero team comic books, but it's definitely true of the Legion, without a doubt.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Alright, so that about wraps us up for this episode. Dan, do you think you'll be interested in reading some Legion now that you've heard what we have to say about the Legion?
It sounds pretty fucking awesome, actually.
This coming from a main X-Men collector.
Yeah, I am in absolute love with the X-Men, and to go on here that there's so many influences from the Legion, let alone with all the interesting crossovers into past DC universe, and then how like the future actually goes and turns out. I'm thoroughly interested now and definitely need some recommended reading material at this point.
Alright guys, well long live the Legion. So recommendations. I'm gonna go around. I think me and Jim are on the same page.
We're on the same page here, yeah.
Pitch it together.
I'm gonna recommend the Great Darkness Saga, Darkseid versus the Legion, Fate of the Universe is in their hands. I don't think anything more needs to be said than what we've already said.
Yeah, we kind of tongue-bathed it to its maximum potential earlier.
It's great. If you only read one Legion story, it should probably be this. I'll admit it might be a little thick with characters as a diving in point, but as a diving in point, I'd probably recommend Lightning Saga. Definitely the best the Legion ever got to. Their Dark Phoenix Saga, if you will.
Yeah.
Brando.
I'm going to recommend Legion Superheroes the reboot by Mark Waid and Barry Kitson, pardon me. I always thought I put the R in there. That is my personal favorite. I haven't read the Great Darkness, so probably gotta get on that. So I'll take your recommendation, but this is the definitive Legion story for me because it's the only identifying trait about my whole perception of the Legion, like their youth, their spirit, all of the aspects of them as a teenage society of heroes. It's definitely a good read. It's really approachable, I think, as far as compared to other Legion continuities or stories, etc., etc. So if you want a good starting point, I feel like that's also a good place to enter if you actually want to just dip your toe in the Legion pool. Definitely, if you want something that will give you a strong impact, I would recommend the former or the latter with your guys' recommendation. But that's what I feel if you guys want to dip your toe in just some Legion stuff and see how it tastes.
All right, Chang.
Keeping with this kind of dynamic, I personally don't have a Legion one, but I'm gonna recommend Convergence #0 right now. Going back, as I said before, I'm a new reader, learning a lot about Odo comics, going back and even reading them and stuff like that. Convergence is actually kind of perfect for me, having a newfound appreciation and love of the Odo comics. I'm now getting to read a new comic that focal points on that.
Yeah.
And so it's not just for new readers, it's not just for old readers, kind of a nitpick back to them. It's definitely for us newer readers too, kind of showing us the history and where our heroes are today, though kind of how they were back then. And it's a really nice love child for us.
I've been really enjoying Convergence as well, and I do notice those 2 back pages in every tie-in that explain kind of the history in a couple panels for the new readers, so that none of this is completely confusing and terrible. So I highly recommend it too. I notice a lot of the professional reviewers aren't too hot on it, but pretty much everyone that I know that's a comic fan has been saying the same thing as you.
They could just be really stuck up.
That's also usually a perfect storm for a cult classic. When critics hate it, fans love it. That means you're dealing with a 2001 type situation. Not saying it's gonna be that good, but especially with comics, critically fucked up. You know what I mean? They shit on it, but then people really like it. Usually means a couple years down the road, that's gonna be classic status stuff.
Daniel.
Friends, internet friends, lovely comic people.
Are you getting a little familiar with them?
Just a little bit. I'm gonna go off the little beaten path here. Tell me. Don't actually tell me. I will tell you. A movie ticket costs about $14. And so, a movie ticket costs around $14.
They are taking you for a sucker at the movies, sir.
For $2.
Whatever.
No,
movies that usually last 2.5 hours. And those are nice, and those can be fun, and there are many great movies. But I'll tell you what, for $8, you can go and get a 1-month subscription to Netflix. Or you can just
Are you recommending Netflix?
their free trial. I'm doing this in a roundabout way.
This is a comic book. Like, yeah, it has all the seasons of Arrested Development.
And now just
have fun, guys.
shout outs to our new sponsors, Netflix.
Fuck Dan, why are you plugging Daredevil in here?
I'll fucking tie your dick into a knot. I
Fuck,
swear
man,
to
why
God.
are we going?
Alright.
Why are we going to Marvel? Jeez.
So
I'm telling you right now, fucking watch Daredevil on Netflix, okay? Watch it. There's a free month of Netflix if you don't have Netflix. If you do have Netflix, then you're already signed up for 13 hours of some of the best fucking superhero fucking stuff on the small screen you'll ever see. Even on the big screen.
Even on the
If
big
I could
screen,
go and
yeah.
fucking put Daredevil on the large movie screen in IMAX, I would fucking do that.
Yeah.
It stomps over everything that Marvel has done before. That's a personal opinion, by the way. Feel free to disagree with me.
Yeah, I'm
but it
backing
stomps
you,
on
man.
it. So, yeah.
About
you're
Agent Carter.
really passionate. I really like Foggy Nelson.
Foggy's awesome.
Yeah,
Foggy's kind of my spirit
Yo,
animal.
how about like profoundly sensitive Kingpin? That's one of the coolest things I've ever fucking seen. Like he's just either
The
on
art gallery introductions.
choking back tears at all times or beating somebody's face in with a solid object, like in a blind rage. It's fucking awesome. It's glorious to watch. And Dan, seriously, I'm gonna back you on this. I think it's like probably the third or maybe third or fourth best thing that Marvel's done, like in the MCU. Like Avengers, Cap 2, Iron Man somewhere in there, and then this is just as fucking good as one of those things. Like it's awesome.
Seriously, if you're down for like street level business going on, watching bones crack, if you like that Batman Begins shit, he doesn't have shit on Matt Murdock.
How about Ollie Queen? Could he take Ollie Queen in a fight?
Okay,
No,
I
good.
love Arrow. I love Arrow so much. Arrow is so great. But this is what Arrow wishes it could do.
I feel like Daredevil gets knocked unconscious a fuck ton though. that guy can't keep he's got some serious brain injuries now. He gets knocked out
Yo.
all the fucking time.
Didn't you hear Matt Murdock's psychotic and has a death wish?
I mean, like, I feel like I'm gonna have a hard time going back to Arrow after binge watching Daredevil. Like, they're different tonally, and like, I still am gonna enjoy both. But like, I'm like, holy shit! Like, this is the other side of this.
I'm
like,
savoring it. I didn't binge watch. I watched the first 4.
I didn't have a whole lot going on this weekend.
I watched them
I'm on
again.
vacation next week. I'm sure.
And again, watch Daredevil, friends. Please. You want more of this? You want Jessica Jones?
Yeah, coming up next.
Jessica
like,
Jones with the Purple Man?
Yeah.
David Tennant's in it? Huh?
But
Purple Man?
But question: will the Luke Cage anal sex scene still be in it?
I mean, I want to know if just a straight up Purple Man scenes are gonna be in it. If they put that shit in there, that's gonna be pretty hardcore.
Look,
Not
man.
no spoilers, but that shit was fucking crazy.
Doesn't matter. Luke Cage anal or boycott. Like,
I think we can just end with that. Right
Yes.
there.
All right, internet. So
That had a lot of internet things.
have a
and
nice night. Have a nice life. Have a nice meal. Whatever it is Brando usually says. I hope you enjoy your movie.